Hello, everyone. I have not presented on Remo before, so I'm going to be doing that slightly awkward tech thing. Brilliant. Okay, so we've got two talks that I'm really excited about coming up, two sessions. I specifically requested to chair this session because they all look so interesting, so I hope that you're as excited as I am. We've got links coming up in the chat at the moment for you to go to Mentimeter and have a look at, I assume, some questions that have been set up for you to make the presentation / session exciting. And we've got Linnea on the screen. Wonderful. So I understand that we're running quite tight to time, so I will let you get started. But I just wanted to check first that you're happy for the session to be recorded. Great. And for those of you who are in the audience, if you can try and pop your questions into the Q&A tab. I see we've got some already. I don't know if those are from the last one. Oh, okay. They are great tips from last time. Brilliant. So you've got until just after 12. And would you prefer to take questions as you go along, or would you prefer to wait and get them all at the end?
At the end, please.
At the end. All right. I will keep an eye out for that then.
And actually, Al, can you see Kelly is our project student and she's here, but I think she's having tech problems getting in. So if she comes in, can you actually shove her up on stage with us?
I cannot, because I am not the tech person, but whoever, Wendy, I assume, can do that, right, Wendy?
Okay.
So yes, we'll make sure that happens. So I would love to welcome Kelly, Smita, and Linnea to talk about their interactive virtual orientation resource. Off you go.
Thank you. Smita, microphone.
Thank you. So we thought we would just start with a little Mentimeter just to get some ideas of what you think would make students anxious during their first time in a lab at university. So it's great to see some responses popping up here. And there's a lot of things like meeting new people, orientation, social anxiety. And we're going to touch on some of these themes a bit as we go on. So it's great to have your brains active in this area and just get some thoughts from you.
Let's see. So thank you very much for choosing to attend our talk. We're very delighted to be able to share what we're doing. So I think the three words that we're going to be focusing on here is transition, anxiety, and student learning. But before that, let's talk about our team. So our team consists of Smita, myself, and our fabulous final year chemistry project student, Kelly. And this is the result of a final year project, a SOTL-based project, where we actually wanted to create a new e-lab resource, a new resource to support transition into the undergraduate teaching labs. And the way we decided to do that is to use, sort of blend all of our skills with technologies and make a lab e-map used for deployment prior to students entering the labs. And the point of this isn't just for chemistry and for chemists. We're hoping by sharing what we've done in our thought processes, this will help you with what you want to do as well. So let's think about higher education, and let's focus in on labs, and let's think about what students have to think about when they are in a laboratory environment. They have to think about the location. They also have to think about safety issues. There's also space and the contents within the space, the size of the lab, what's in it, all the different chemicals, the equipment, what is it, what's it look like, where is it, where do you put your lab books, all of those things. And then, of course, you've got your subject material. So the chemistry, you have to keep in mind the ideas of the theory, you're learning new manual skills. Where do you put your compounds? How do you dispose of it? How do you take notes? Where do you write your observations? And then you've got people and communication between people. So you have to communicate with other students, with lecturers, with technicians, with demonstrators. And then you've got, will you get there on time to the lab? How long is it going to last? Can you finish on time? We've also got students from various different backgrounds, people that have had no hands-on lab experience, and those have actually been in labs before. So how do you cater to that? And then we've got assessment that's going on, you know, the questions that are being asked, things are being marked, and the assessment overall. So the impact, you can see that this is a lot going on in the one lab. The impact on that is there's a high cognitive load. And this can lead to anxiety and worries in the, and this can make transition into higher education and also into each lab problematic. And we feel that this could impact on the learning that goes on in the lab, and in a lab, the scientific inquiry. So we have an opportunity here to try to address some of this through this honors project with Kelly. And she was aiming to create an interactive lab e-map, aimed to be deployed before the start of entry into a lab. And then we were going to evaluate it. So this talk, we are going to start with sharing with you some of our design principles that Smita and I have developed over the years. Chat very quickly about how we created this resource. And then you're going to be led on a magnificent tour, an actual of this lab e-map, so you can see what is done. And then we're going to discuss the evaluations and what we've learned from it. So our design principles, when we make, Smita and I, when we make a project, is we're led by pedagogy, but we're really led by our student impact. So this is input. This is where Kelly's brain, her magnificent brain, comes into it. And we also like to make our resources interactive, and we want to allow students to guide themselves and explore it on their own. And life isn't life without a bit of whimsy and a bit of fun, and we really honor this tradition, so we like gamification as well. As well, we like to give information piece by piece and build up some knowledge as you go through. Hopefully, all of this will end up reducing the cognitive load, and by doing so, it would hopefully reduce the stress or the anxiety that students may encounter in the lab. Another thing that we like to do is, because we're making the resources ourselves, we're making the videos ourselves, the photos ourselves, is we're trying to build a sense of belonging into this, into what we make. So we're trying to build those connections of the students to the Glasgow University, to our School of Chemistry. And all together, this is hopefully going to weave together to support student well-being. And at the end of it, our end goal is to enhance the student learning experience. So those are our design principles. Now we have to think about the content that we want to put into the lab e-map. Now let's think about the lab we're focusing on here. We've got lots of labs. This is the Quant 1 lab, which is housed in the Speakman lab. This is for first years. We have about 600 students. There's 8 sessions a week, 7 experiments going on, running over 10 weeks. So you can imagine it's quite a bit of a show going on. So what do we want to put into our e-map? Well, we want to show where the lab is. We want to include some pre-lab info. We want to show the actual layout of the lab and where the experiments sit within the lab. And we want to give additional information of where the technicians live, where the safety area is. And the way we did this is we used images. So we used 2 types of images, just normal photos, and we also have a 360 special camera. So we took 360-degree images. And then within all of this, we're going to embed additional information about the type of glassware, what it's called, the type of chemicals, any hazards associated with it, and safety issues all the way through. So all of this is going to be built into our resource. But before we build that resource, we have to think about the creation of it. And we have to think about the end user. So we have to consider the user experience, and we want to make it something that it's easy to use, it's easy to navigate, and it's visually appealing, because it's always nice to look at something that's nice, right? And we want to make it interactive. And we want the information to come in a scaffolding approach so you can reduce cognitive load. But you don't also want to just consider the user experience. You want to consider the creator experience. You're building this, right? So again, we want to make it something that's easy. We want to make something that's adaptable, that's flexible, and affordable. And we decided to use, as we've used before, HTML5. So it allows us, it's a web-based language, allows us to create interactive e-content. So we can make it and we can share it online. And the resource we used is Genially. Okay, so this is a media platform. Again, it's easy to use and ka-ching, it's inexpensive. And we use this to contain all the content that we create, plus add additional materials into it. Now, you might have had your ears perk up when you saw 360 images and content. Well, in order for us to include that into our resource, there's a few extra through, and we thought we'd share them with you. So we have to take our images and we have to play with them a little bit using a tool called Marzipano. It's a GitHub tool. And this allows us to take our 360 images and put hotspots. Now, these hotspots are something you click on and it takes you to either to another spot, another resource, or even it can have information that floats above it. Okay, so we add these hotspots to each of our 360 images. Then we have to link those images together to create a 360 tour. Then we export that file. We're not done yet. That file then has to be hosted somewhere, which we've hosted it on our website. And then we can use that link to add it into our Genially resource. So we can add all of our content in there. So we can add our labels and the info for the images. We have our maps we can put into there. We can add our photos in there. We even put a Google map in there. We even put in our survey link into here. So once we've created our Genially resource, we then have a web link. And that web link then we can use for access. People can use a browser to access it, or you could even embed it into Moodle. Now, why do we like Genially? I feel like a salesperson here, but I want to share with you. So if you imagine a PowerPoint, you've got various slides. And with your slides, you can go back and forth between slides. Genially allows you to do that too. But you can actually skip in between slides in different orders and different layers quite easily. So let's look at the landing slide, just for example here. So here's a landing page, and let's say we have two hotspots on there. Okay, those hotspots will take you to different areas, or it might be links to YouTube or different information, but we can also build layers between each of the slides. So in this case, I'm just going to give you a graphic here. There's your slide, layers behind it, and those are your hotspots. Okay, so this, you can show your hotspots and link to various information all the way through. So when you look at it on the top face, it might look very simplistic and you might have only a few interactive links. But once you get in there, you can go on a magical mystery tour on all the information that's there. And the information you can embed is quite big. So the world's your oyster. You can link and create lots of different things. And you can also hover over and have images pop up and text up. And each of your slides and link your way through. So Genially gives you a simple appearance. You've got multiple layers of information, but you can keep that cognitive load. You can scaffold your way into it. It's interactive. It's self-guided if you want it that way, and you can make it linear or non-linear. So how does our Genially look? Well, just to give you an overview, we have a landing page. We then show the location of the school within the university, the location of the lab within the school. We've got information about the labs, and we've got two lab maps. One is a static with interactive information, and the other one is a 360 tour, and then we have a survey. Now, hopefully we've got your attention here, and you would like to see it, because Kelly is going to now share us and take us on a magical tour.
Thank you. All right, so this is our Genially resource here. So this is the landing page initially. So like Linnea was saying, you have all these different hotspot buttons for navigation. So we've got this little start button And you've got all these little interactive hotspots that were added, self-led exploration of the resource. Geniality also allows you to do all these little animations and things to make it look really smooth. Is where the lab actually is. So initially, where the in relation to the rest of campus. This little Google Maps embed here allows you to have a look around Google Maps of campus, see where the building is, and this here is an external link to the University of Glasgow's Campus Maps website. So now we then have a floor plan of the Joseph Black building with the Speakman Lab highlighted and a quick explanation room numbers work. And on what you might need before entering their first lab. So pre-lab questions done, having the right PPE and any other equipment they might need. And then we move on to the Speakman Lab itself. So here we've got a floor plan here, benches, doors, like fume hoods and things marked out. This is the sort of main interactive hub for navigation of the resource. So we've got our floor plan here, we've got our interactive hotspots on every bench, labeling the relevant experiment. That just pops up whenever you hover over anything. Each of these set up lab bench with more of these little hotspots that allow you to take a closer look. So these are layered on top of each other so that then look of the experiments, you can hover over things and have a look and see what different pieces of equipment are called. So navigate either back to take a closer look at other parts. Experiment entirely, you can navigate back to the floor plan. Here we've just got different pieces of equipment labeled and different chemicals labeled with their hazard information. So if I were to pop back to so we have different experiments labeled, including just some pictures of the entrance, the study area, what the flammable waste disposal looks like, and we also have our fire exits labeled for safety, and our technician's office, which is where our first aid is located. So from this map, you can also then go and have a look at the 3. And this is our Marzipanal resource here that's embedded. So this part is self-contained, but it allows you to drag around and have a look at the Speakman Lab set up for the Quant 1 labs. So similarly, you have all these little hotspots with the experiment numbers labeled. Clicking on those just takes you straight to the experiment where you have all the different equipment labeled and ready to go. You can, as you would like, you can, if you can see another experiment from this bench, you have a hotspot moving to it. And that allows you to just free as you like, move around the lab. And as you can see, we have our chemicals again with their hazard information. And this is where the gamification element comes in, because you can see we have a little badger toy over here that gets you points when you find, as well as Linnea and Smita hiding in a lot of the images, and that also gives you points whenever you find them. This is to encourage people to explore, look around. If you look straight up at the ceiling, then you get a little Easter egg there. If you look straight down at the bench as well. So these are just little bits of fun to encourage people to have a be less scared of the entire thing. So you can also exit this from this little button up here. Just back to the floor plan. So you can go in the 360 tour and static images as much. And whenever you're finished, we just had a link to our anonymous survey. So that's our resource.
Excellent. So we're hoping to roll out that resource next year, but in the meantime, what we've got is some preliminary evaluation data, which I'm just going to take you through now. So we've decided to survey our chemistry undergrads at all levels and also our academic staff. And our students have different experiences with face-to-face teaching. So just note that our levels 1 and 2 students have only ever experienced the Quant 1 lab online, whereas our levels experienced this in person before the pandemic. And participation in our survey has been fully voluntary and anonymous, with students invited to take part through posts on their Moodle forum. So far, we have had 29 respondents to our survey. 3 of these were academic staff and the rest were students. And across those students, 13 were from levels 1 and 2, and the other 13 were from levels 3 to 5. Now, first, we wanted to ask an open question just to get a sense of what aspects of the lab were causing our students to feel anxious or worried or concerned when entering the lab for the very first time. And some of the responses are here, and they kind of echo the results that we had from the Mentee survey at the start of this talk. So one student became nervous because of all the glassware and the equipment set up that they couldn't recognise. Another person worried they wouldn't be able to find the class and that their level of lab experience. Someone else was worried because of how large the lab itself was and the sheer number of people inside there, which they found very nerve-wracking. And unfortunately, another student said that they found almost everything made them feel anxious in the lab. So as well as getting an idea of the types of things that stressed out different people, we also just wanted to quantify which aspects were most likely to be causing worry for the class as a whole. So we asked students to rate how comfortable or uncomfortable they felt about various aspects, and things which were very common to worry about were entering the new unseen environment. So 13 out of 29 students responded that would make them feel uncomfortable. Also the assessment and encountering new types of lab equipment. Okay, so as well as finding out which particular things caused our students anxiety during their transition into the lab, we wanted to just find out what their general feelings were about their first experience in the university chemistry lab, both with and without the lab EMAP resource. So we asked them how much that they agreed or disagreed, and that they felt confident, prepared, and anxious. Now, without our lab EMAP, we see a spread of responses here. So just remember that the red and the orange here correspond to agreeing, the grey and the light blue are disagreeing, and the dark blue is not applicable. So 10 people agreed or strongly agreed that they felt they'd be confident entering the lab, whereas 9 people disagreed or strongly disagreed with that. And a similar balance of responses was found about whether they felt prepared. And note a large proportion of respondents, that was 17 out of the 29, agreed or strongly agreed that they felt anxious with their first chemistry lab. We then asked them to consider how they'd feel if they were entering for the first time, but they had prior access to our lab EMAP creation first. And we note here that there's a really strong positive shift in the feelings of confidence and preparedness. And in terms of anxiety, the number of people who have agreed with feeling anxious dropped down from 17 to just 3. Now we've also asked what aspects of this lab that students found most helpful. And one person noted that it was the fact that it gave information about hazards. And it's really interesting that they're picking up that it made it fun to learn, and this style of resource made it less daunting. Someone else said they really loved the labels of the chemicals and equipment and being able to click and move around the lab, so that self-led element was really fun. And they've also noted that this would have made them feel a lot more confident in entering this teaching environment. And quite a few people also picked up specifically on the 360-degree aspect of the resource as well, which gave a really good sense of what the physical space of the lab is like. If you remember, we also had some elements of fun, so the hidden figures of both myself and Linnea and the little badger hidden across the lab. And someone has picked up here and said that seeing Dr. Fowler and Dr. Odedra would have helped to reduce my anxiety about entering the labs for the first time, it helped to show that the lecturers are not scary people. I think this is a really interesting finding just from this aspect of including some whimsy and fun within the resource. Okay, so we do have some future plans going forward. We're planning to a longitudinal study. We're going to be expanding our current resource with more materials, such as a quiz and videos. And we're also going to be applying this kind of approach in different ways as well. So to help with transition into other teaching labs and to help our postgrads as well. And we're also thinking about using this approach for open days, recruitment and outreach. Now, there are many benefits of student partnership, and I'm sure you've heard some of them already today, but really having the reflective insights of a student, we really loved having the creativity of Kelly during this project, and just the fact that we could get the relevance and relatability embedded within the resource. Now, we'd really like to acknowledge Dr. James Gaynor from the University of Liverpool and Dr. Smita Ladwa from Greenwich, who have both been sources of many inspiring discussions and insights with myself and Linnea, and they've really helped us get to grips with some of the strategy. A huge thank you, of course, to Kelly and her cat, Theo. It was an absolute treat to collaborate with you both. So this project has been led by myself and Dr. Linnea Solar, and we're both from the Chirps group, and we actually do quite a lot of fun collaborations together. So together we are Chicks. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attention today, and we'd be happy to take your questions.
I also enjoyed your cat picture. That was, I mean, there's been a lot in the chat about how useful it is, but personally, it's not a subject that I have ever really been in past a standard grade at school, but just generally that idea of knowing in advance what things are going to be would be wonderful, I think, for everyone, and particularly for me as an autistic person. I think that I like to try and plan out exactly where I'm going to sit on the train every time. So something like this would just have made a huge difference if I was in that situation. Since we're running behind, I hope you don't mind. Hearts for you too. I hope you don't mind if we just take one question, if there's somebody that would like to ask one, and then the next. But the presenters have wonderfully said that they're going to be around in the poster space afterwards if anyone does have more questions for them. So yes, I don't know how it works on Remo, but if anyone did have a question that they would like to ask now.
There was a question.
Do you want me to ask it? The question was, how much time did it take to create this amazing resource? Also, is there an easy way to duplicate it to adapt for more than one practical?
I think I can start off with answering that. The time needed to make it, and then Kelly can actually give the practical side of that. The planning takes a lot of time. Things planned, you have to have all the resources made and well designed beforehand, and then Kelly can actually talk about stitching it together. Smita and I have a lot of experience with these different things, so luckily we had that background, and then Kelly was able to use her brain to pull it together. And the answer to yes, there is flexibility. We can actually go back in and open things up, but Kelly can answer that.
So the actual stitching together of was a little time consuming. With good planning, obviously it wasn't as time consuming as it could have been. But every aspect, Geniali gives you so much control over so many different aspects of your presentation. So for every hotspot, for every element in there, there were 3 things to consider: the placement of it, the link where it would actually take you, and then the animation of it. So every single one of those animations where everything sort of floats in, all of those have to be done manually. And the control it gives you is ridiculous. So that's, I mean, the animation, it gives you down to the second, down to the millisecond when you want it to come in. So that was fairly time consuming. I think all in all, with all the layering of the slides, this was maybe, what do you think, 40 or 50 slides in editor mode before it was all sort of condensed together. As far as adapting it for more than one practical, yeah, you can absolutely go in and just add new layers, add new hotspots, add new slides. It's very easy to add things into Geniali. The only thing I'd say is with the 360 tour, that's where it becomes a little bit more difficult. Marzipano is a browser-hosted software, so there's no way to download the software, and because it's a free sort of demo-like tool, there aren't necessarily profiles or anything. So for Marzipano, you unfortunately kind of have to do that in one and then export the file, and then that's you. You can go in and edit the file you can go into the file's HTML5, but unless you have a good knowledge of HTML programming, I wouldn't bother with that. So Geniali is a lot easier to edit than Marzipano is. And does the resource still work on mobile devices? Yes, it does.
Perfect. I think I'm going to stop things there for the questions. Thank you so much. That was just amazing. I think we've all been quite excited to see it. And thank you so much for sharing it with us. And we'll move on to the next session.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
All right, so we should have Michelle and Ourania coming up on screen in a moment. They're going to be talking about the development and implementation of equality, diversity, and inclusion teaching in an undergraduate program. So I think it'll be something that goes really well with the previous session. Yeah, Wendy, if you could just invite
I think it's come up
Linnea
now.
on stage, that would be great.
Hi, Elliot.
And
Can you hear me okay?
there's another Mentimeter link that's been shared if people would like to access it now and put in some answers.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. And I can see actually that it's only going to let you answer question 1 just now until I move it on. So I'll come to question 2. Had time to answer question 1 on Menti, if that's okay. So let me just share my slides, please. Sorry, give me one moment.
Michelle, would you rather have questions as they come, or would you rather save them till the end?
Till the end, please.
Brilliant. All right.
Right. Hopefully you can see my slides okay now.
They're just loading for me, at least.
Okay, actually,
yeah,
I had to change the settings. Just give me one moment.
Of course.
Okay, hopefully you can still see those okay.
Yeah.
So firstly, thank you for allowing us the opportunity to talk today. I'm presenting on behalf of myself and my colleague Ourania Varsou, who actually started her maternity leave yesterday, so she won't be joining us today. And I'm going to talk about the work we've been doing to develop and implement some equality, diversity and inclusion teaching into our BSc Anatomy undergraduate programme here at the University of Glasgow in the School of Life Sciences. So I'm sure I don't have to convince you all why it's important that we include ED&I teaching into our curriculum, because we want to, of course, make sure that higher education is accessible to and representative of all learners. We want to be able to attract a broad spectrum of students and also enable them to achieve their full potential. So thinking more around the concept of creating equity rather than necessarily equality. And again, I'm sure with this audience, everyone's so mindful of the recent Black Lives Matter and Me Too movements, which really reinforced and brought back into the public eye the importance of trying to be more equal, diverse and inclusive as a society, as well as within education, and really brought back into focus the challenges around discrimination. And of course, with this brought an urgency for us to review our teaching practices. And of course, that's at every level, from thinking about the policies and procedures in place to make sure those are inclusive, but also thinking about the actual curriculum that we teach, whether that's around decolonising the curriculum, and there's lots of people from Glasgow working on that, and lots of lovely presentations coming up today. But also thinking about equality, diversity, inclusion more generally as a concept, and making sure that our education is inclusive for our diverse student body. Now, this is no easy task, as I'm sure you can imagine. And actually, a fellow anatomist wrote in her publication, so Gabriella Finn, just earlier this year, wrote in her publication that this is messy, it's uncomfortable, and it is iterative. And it will require personal, cultural, and institutional commitment, reflection, critical thinking, and action. And above all, it's an opportunity to create a diverse and inclusive learning environment. So I just wanted to share that quote because I think it shows the enormity of what we may be facing, but also the huge benefit that we can achieve by including this in our curriculum. But it is challenging. And it's challenging because we need to recognise, first of all, that we're all coming at this from a very different starting place. We as educators and also our students are all coming from very different lived experiences, having faced different past discriminations or microaggressions, perhaps, based on our own individual protected characteristics. And of course, as people, we're a combination of many of those 9 protected characteristics. And the intersectionality and interconnection of those is another important consideration. But in order to really adapt our course and embrace this opportunity for change, it's going to require some really difficult conversations. At times, it might require us to acknowledge past wrongs and injustices against minorities, for example. It might include discussions of rather sensitive topics. And through doing this, it really gives us a chance to recognise individuals who may have contributed to the past without recognition in the past or even in the present day, or without consent, perhaps. And the importance of sharing that information with our students so that they start to think about where our information, our knowledge, our research comes from. So I work in the field of anatomy, and like many topics, the anatomy curriculum can at times be heavily embedded in colonialism. Much of what we teach comes from European white males. And when we look at the resources that we use for teaching, they have a real lack of diversity and inclusion. There's a real reinforcement of the default male concept. When we look at anatomy textbooks, they tend to use the white male as the norm as such, and only even present females when they are thinking about the female reproductive system or pregnancy. But would rarely present, for example, a female kidney, assuming that it is just the same as the male. But it's not just about whether they are male or female, it's also whiteness. They often are white individuals, rarely showing individuals of colour, rarely representing disabilities, spectrum of age, and a spectrum of body types, for example. Now, of course, this is detrimental to the students for a number of reasons, including a lack of representation for our diverse student body. But it also really fails to teach our students about the real world diversity they're going to experience once they graduate. We teach anatomy to lots of students, including healthcare professionals. If we are not teaching them about the diversity of anatomy based on these protected characteristics, then we're going to end up with health professionals who've never looked at skin disorders in anybody other than a white individual. So then unable to diagnose skin disorders in individuals of colour. We're going to produce a cohort of researchers who may fail to consider the importance of diversity in their clinical trial. If a clinical trial for a new medicine, for example, is only focusing on testing it in white males of middle age, then how representative is that drug will work in the same way in individuals from different protected characteristics? And of course, the COVID pandemic really highlighted the importance of these protected characteristics when it comes to health matters. Individuals who are Black or from South Asian origins have been shown to have a higher mortality rate when exposed to COVID-19, even when we account for socioeconomic backgrounds. And it's really important that we think about things like that when we're thinking about how to treat individuals, how to prevent the disease in the first place, how to ensure the medicines are correct, and how to target our public health information to individuals from diverse backgrounds. So at that point, I would like to invite everyone, if you haven't already done so, to jump onto the Mentimeter link, and I will advance it onto the second slide, and ask you just to take a moment to reflect on whether you think you have anything in your course that you that would encourage the students to think about ED&I issues within your topic, or one thing that you might like to introduce in your topic. Sorry. So hopefully Mentimeter is working for you. Some people are saying they cannot access the link. For sake of time, I'm probably going to keep going unless lots of people tell me that they can't. It's working okay. Okay. I'm going to keep going in that case, but let me just quickly share the Menti code.
It keeps changing the question for me, but I'm sure it'll be fine. As long as people can answer the first one for now.
Yeah. So I can see people have. So a real mixture of responses for have you introduced any EDI. 39% of responders have said yes, 19% saying no, and 44% saying no, but I am keen to be able to do so. So that's really reassuring to hear. And the second slide should hopefully allow you to answer what you think you might introduce, but I'll let you hopefully be able to do that. But if not, I'm just going to keep going with the talk for the sake of timings today. So we made the changes within the course that Ourania and I coordinate, which is the BSc in Anatomy, and we run the Year 3 programme. So this programme has normally around 30 students each year and counts for a full 120 credits for the full year. So we decided that we wanted to integrate ED&I into our course. And we did that by introducing 5 new interactive and collaborative workshops. So we developed these new workshops, but we wanted to clearly embed them into our current course within the ongoing teaching. So for example, our new workshop that we developed on diversity of skin, we introduced that workshop following the teaching the students would have traditionally got on the anatomy of skin and the associated lab. And I'll talk you through those workshops in just a moment. We also adapted our assessments in order to incorporate ED&I into the assessments, because in our experience, anything that you introduce into a course that's not assessed often doesn't get as much engagement as if the students believe that it's going to be assessed. So as part of this, we gained ethical approval within the college to survey our students before we started our new teaching and after it, in order to gain feedback from the students about their thoughts and perspective of this new teaching. So some thoughts from the pre-teaching survey is that we asked students around how inclusive they felt the university, the School of Life Sciences and anatomy as a subject were. And we were really pleased to see that in coming into Year 3, the students actually felt that this was a very inclusive environment. However, when we asked them the same thing about feeling representative, the students were less positive about them as an individual feeling represented within the university, the school, or indeed the subject. We also asked them about how they felt that we had already considered the protected characteristics within their level 1 and 2 human biology teaching. And unfortunately, our students didn't feel that we had considered many of these protected characteristics, with age and sex being better considered than race or disability, for example. So this was our starting place before we delivered any of the teaching. When we were preparing this teaching, we developed a student handbook for the ED&I teaching, so that all the information was contained in one document to make it easier for the students to see how it all linked together and be able to access all the resource and links we created. The handbook also had an outline for each workshop, clearly showing things like the intended learning outcomes for the workshop, what the structure of the workshop was going to be, the links, and what we expected them to do before, during, and after the workshops. All of the workshops took place online because of some of the challenges we were facing around COVID, but the sessions were not recorded in order to make sure that the students felt comfortable to be able to freely discuss these topics without fear of their statements or their questions being recorded. And at the outset of this, we asked all students to sign a code of conduct. And we thought this was really important to set the tone, because we're very aware, of course, of how sensitive this topic can be. So we reminded students of our expectations at the outset of being inclusive, considerate, respectful, etc. And we also reminded students that it should be a safe environment where we were all learning. We're all learning together about the terminology that individuals find acceptable, and learning how to support each other through this experience. And ask students to consider calling in rather than calling out. Calling out can at times be a little confrontational and make an individual feel bad when they genuinely didn't mean something to be negatively phrased. So we encourage students instead to call in staff or students. At times we can all make mistakes and we can all learn, and we reminded the students of this, and we're very open to saying, actually, if I say anything that you think's not appropriate, let me know, because I want to learn too. And the students actually handled this very maturely and responsibly throughout the workshops. In the student handbook, we also made sure to highlight areas of support for the students. Again, being mindful that this could raise discussions that might be triggering for our students. So encourage them to be able to speak to Ourania and I directly. We were in all of the workshops, and reminded them at each time if they wanted to stay on the line to chat with us at the end or request a specific private phone call, they were very welcome to do so. One of the co-chairs of our School Athena Swan committee also got involved in these workshops, and Vic Pattison attended most of the workshops and again offered the students the opportunity to chat to her as someone independent if they felt they were affected. We also reminded the students about the other sources of support that they could reach out to if they felt they were affected by the discussions. So what were these workshops? So we had 5 workshops. The first workshop, and these were spread all through both semesters. So the workshops integrated within their traditional course. The first workshop introduced the concept of ED&I. We talked about the Equality Act, we talked about the protected characteristics, and we also talked about that concept of androgenization in anatomy, so this concept of the default male. The second workshop we entitled Diverse Anatomist, and this was inspired by a workshop that we actually used to do last year in the course, whereby we asked students to pick a famous anatomist, work in a group to research that anatomist, thinking about what they discovered, why it was important, and then they presented that back to us as part of an assessment. However, what we found was the students all ended up picking a white European male as their famous anatomist. And whilst that does reflect the literature, the online resources, the fact that so much of it has come from European white males. However, it didn't allow us to really show any diversity or representation within our course. So we asked students this time to pick a diverse anatomist who could be associated with a minority group from any of the protected characteristics. And in doing so, the students found it very difficult to find a famous anatomist who met the protected characteristics. What happened was we got a transition from it all being white males to all being white females being presented on. And whilst that was an improvement, it's something that we need to continue to work hard and support our students on being able to source other anatomists that meet other protected characteristics. The third workshop was around this idea of dissection. So we teach human anatomy here at Glasgow using cadaver dissection. These cadavers are very generously donated by the individual signing up before the time of their death. And we use them in order to teach our labs. But with our local population, these cadavers are predominantly white individuals. So this is something that is not new. It's something we've always experienced, but it's something that we maybe haven't been so vocal and open and honest about. So it's something we introduced into this workshop, was discussing the concept of why are all these cadavers white? What are the challenges with getting diversity into our cadaver donation programme? And why is this important? And we use that as an opportunity to talk about the diversity of the anatomy of the skin and why that is relevant and important. Our fourth workshop was looking at ED&I of human disease. Again, traditionally, our course covered workshops where the students worked together to create a wiki around the anatomy, the physiology, the treatment of a disease that they get to pick for themselves. This year, we just adapted that to ask them to also include, as well as the anatomy, physiology and treatment, they also had to include how this disease specifically affects individuals of 3 different protected characteristics, and they could pick what that characteristics were for their own group. Finally, the last workshop was similar to the disease one, but this time looking at an anatomical structure. So, for example, they could pick the brain and talk about how the brain was different in individuals who are male versus female, for example, or individuals who are neurodiverse, or individuals who have a disability. So they had free rein over the structure they picked and which protected characteristics they wanted to choose. And again, we associated this with some summative assessment where the students worked in groups to discuss the concept and the material, but then created an individual poster which they submitted and counted as 5% of their final grade for the course. So following on from the end of these workshops, we asked the students to complete a short Microsoft Forms survey, and we were really pleased to see that they were rated 4 out of 5 for student satisfaction. The students really liked the broad range of topics covered and really actually enjoyed applying it to their other parts of their course, which was nice to hear. They liked discussing and hearing other students' opinions in an open forum. And they really liked having an opportunity to reflect on their own opinions, something that we rarely actually take the time to do. They really enjoyed the group working skills aspect of this, but you'll not be surprised to hear that they were less keen on the assessment aspect of this. When we asked them how important they thought ED&I was within an Anatomy 3 course, both before the teaching and after, they said they rated it as 8.5 out of 10. And that didn't change. So it was nice to see that our students thought this was important before we did the teaching and continued with the same opinion afterwards. With quotes such as, "The study of the human body needs to be diverse and equal to get a rounded education," or "It is important in any degree," which was really nice to hear. Now, I'll remind you that in the pre-survey, our students told us that they felt that the university, the school, and anatomy as a subject were very inclusive, but they were less positive about feeling represented within those aspects. So when we asked them these questions again, following on from our teaching, it was reassuring to see that they continued to think that the School of Life Sciences and the University of Glasgow were inclusive, but that also anatomy as a subject was also inclusive. However, interestingly, they really highlighted that human anatomy with the use of the cadavers and the specimens we use here in Glasgow was either somewhat or not very inclusive. And actually, this quote really sums it up. So one of the students stated, "The cadavers, through no fault of the department, do not represent race, as the majority, if not all, were white." So it was nice to see that they were recognising that it was not inclusive, but that they now understood why that was the case. We were a little disappointed initially to see that they didn't think that this topic was inclusive, but actually, having reflected on it, I think what we've actually done is we've spent too much time highlighting within the workshops the past wrongs and acknowledging the challenges. And actually what we need to do moving forward is spend more time acknowledging what actually has been done well. And that's something we'll adapt for the future. But the really nice thing was seeing that we got an improvement in students feeling represented at every level, from the university, the school, and in the topic. To see that actually with what we had done with these workshops, they now actually did feel represented within the subject. But in light of transparency, we definitely didn't get it all right. This is the first time that we have run these workshops. And what our students were telling us was that they felt like within Anatomy 3, that we had considered age, sex, pregnancy and maternity, and race and ethnicity well within the course. Disability, and religions and beliefs. And that's something we can take forward and think about when we adapt the course further next year. The students also suggested that they would like a little bit more of the didactic component of the workshops. They were still not feeling fully confident in their discussions with the introduction. Sharing the slides so that hopefully I can open up Mentimeter. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Great. We are a little short on time, but I think we, again, have all really enjoyed that presentation. It was just wonderful to hear how you're talking about trying to reframe the idea that there's a default and then everyone else are, people that aren't considered. And it was really good to see your reflections on what worked really well and what might need to be improved in the future. We've got a couple of questions that have come up in the Q&A tab. So if we just take those, and then I think if there are any more questions, then maybe people can get in touch with you afterwards.
Yeah, happy
So the
to.
first is, did you embed any critical reflective tools whereby students could critique white Western male dominant anatomists, for instance, to consider whose voices, backgrounds, contexts their work exclude?
So we didn't specifically include that. And I think that's something that we would like to introduce more of. So we introduced these workshops really to start getting ED&I skill that kind of quietly happens in the background. But I think moving forward, we really need to now look at the rest of the curriculum and think how within existing teaching can we make sure that those sorts of things are coming out, so that when lecturers we get more of a discussion that can be how that can be taken forward.
Sorry, I keep getting lag, so if I'm weirdly quiet, that's why. Then there's one other, and I think the answer to this will be a really interesting one, which is, could the exercise on finding diverse anatomists have been more productive if it was not a summative assignment? Because I think you gave a really good rationale for why it was summative. I think that makes a lot of sense, but it's interesting to think, do you think students might have engaged with it differently if it had not been? I wondered if it was me that was frozen, but I think Michelle's frozen. So we'll give her a sec and hopefully she will burst back into existence. But let's see, maybe there's something in the chat from her. Yeah, it is Michelle. Okay, well, whilst we wait for her to come back and just, she disappeared. Yes, okay. Interesting question. I think we're probably going to have to finish up, but as I am not the presenter. Oh, she's back. Okay, great. Hopefully we can just have a really... Hello. Sorry, I don't think we heard any of that because you'd frozen. So but you're still quite frozen. So I don't want to speak for Michelle, but I can imagine that balancing the oh, you're moving. Yes. Hello.
I got disconnected for some reason. Hopefully I'm back. Can you hear me?
We didn't hear. We heard not a word of it. Unfortunately, it was all frozen. So a quick answer would be wonderful.
A quick answer to the assessment question, was that the
yes, that's
question
right,
I was dealing with? Yeah, hard to know whether it would have been more productive if it wasn't a summative assessment. I mean, the students engaged with it really, really well. I think what they found difficult was finding an anatomist who wasn't typical. So I think that was the harder part. So they actually engaged really well with the assessment. Their presentations were brilliant. It's just that instead of choosing all white males, what we had was all white females. And whilst that brought in a new aspect, it still wasn't as diverse as we wanted it to be. So I think moving forward, I think what we need is more support from us to maybe give them some examples of people who they could start to look up, because I think that's what they were finding really difficult.
Yeah, I suppose that's due to the nature. The whole point is like these people have been hidden from history almost intentionally. So now go and find them. So yeah, that sounds really smart.
And in some ways it was a nice reflection for the students, because what they were coming back is saying, I can't find anybody. And we were saying, yeah, right, exactly. Can you see why your curriculum is the way it is then? So yeah, works both ways.
Very teachable moment there, I think.
Yeah, while sort of thinking, oh, how can we help them? But yeah, so future, I think we'll spend some time over the summer seeing if we can gather some examples to be able to at least incorporate if they don't find them for themselves.
Brilliant. There's a question here, but I think I might get you to take that to Michelle afterwards, Julian, if you don't mind, just because we are because we're out of time. But it's been really wonderful listening to what you've been working on, and I think it's something that we can really all learn from and hopefully adapt within our own subject areas.
Thank you. And I'm really happy if anyone wants to know more, I'm happy to share the resources that we developed. I'm happy to share the handbook and things like that if anyone wants to see the sort of the code of conduct and those sorts of aspects. If anyone is interested, then please just email me. More than happy to share.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to be in touch with all the presenters because I just found it all fascinating. I'd really love to see those things. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been a real pleasure to chair this session, and I hope that you all have a lovely lunchtime, assuming that's what's happening next.
Thanks, everyone.